This is the story of a bomber pilot who vanished in 1943, and the day a glacier finally gave his plane back. In the summer of 2023, high in the Alps, hikers spotted something shining under the melting ice. At first it looked like scrap metal, but as the ice broke further, the outline appeared, a plane. Its tail number was still visible. Records confirmed it. This was the bomber that had disappeared 80 years ago. For decades, the official line had been short and simple. Bad weather. Lost contact. Presumed dead. The crew's families were told there was nothing more to say. They received folded flags, a letter of condolence, and silence. But now the plane was here, and what was found inside its cockpit raised more questions than it answered. Beneath the pilot's seat was a leather pouch, wrapped in oilskin and protected from the ice. Across the front, in bold block letters, it said, "Eyes only," and below that, "DONOT open." Someone had opened it. Inside were three things: a typewritten mission brief, a hand-drawn map, and a list of names. Some of those names had been crossed out in red pencil. At the top of the mission brief was a code name, a single word never seen in any declassified file. That word was Nightingale. The map inside the pouch showed a flight path, but it was not the same path recorded in the official logbooks. The bomber had been far from where the history books said it was supposed to be. It wasn't even in the same valley, which leaves us with questions that can't be ignored. First, who was the pilot, and why was his plane so far off course? Second, what was Nightingale, and why did the mission brief call this crew expendable? Third, who were the people on that list, and why were some of their names crossed out? Three questions, three doors. Each one opens into a story that was never meant to surface. The official version is neat. A storm, a loss, a line in a book. But the pouch does not tell a neat story. It tells a hidden one. A story of a mission that never made it into the record. A mission that carried orders too sensitive to survive on paper. Over the next chapters, we will follow the clues in that pouch. The false map, the strange codename, and the list of names that someone marked for reasons still unknown. We will follow the trail through archives, diaries, and survivor accounts until we can see why this mission was erased. And by the end, you will understand why the truth of this bomber's last flight was buried for 80 years, and why even now, someone doesn't want it told. If you're drawn to real World War II mysteries, subscribe, because what's inside that pouch changes everything. The story we were told is not the story the pouch tells. The story begins in the spring of 1943 at a quiet airfield carved into the Alps. The war was raging, but on that morning, the mood at the base was routine. Crews were briefed on the day's flights, engines warmed in the cold air, and one bomber crew prepared for what their commanding officer called a simple reconnaissance run. The mission sounded ordinary. Take off at first light, cross a stretch of occupied territory, photograph supply lines, return by noon. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. The kind of mission pilots flew every day, and most returned from without trouble. The crew of this bomber had heard the same line before: routine recon. They joked about it as they strapped into their seats. Yet one of them, Lieutenant James Walker, the pilot, seemed quieter than usual. He tucked a folded photograph into the side of his flight jacket. It was a picture of his young wife, taken just before he shipped overseas. She had written on the back in neat script, "Come home safe." Walker carried it on every flight. At 5:47 hours, the bomber rolled down the strip, lifted from the runway, and banked toward the mountains. Men on the ground watched until it was a dark speck against the pale sky, then lost it to the clouds. The logs show no issues at takeoff, no weather warnings, no sign that this flight would be different from any other. For a while, all went according to plan. Radio reports came in at regular intervals: altitude, course, fuel check. Then the line went silent. At first, the control tower assumed it was interference. Mountains often blocked signals. But minutes passed, then an hour, then longer. The routine mission was no longer routine. By afternoon, search aircraft were dispatched. They swept over the intended route, combing valleys and ridges, but nothing was found. The bomber was gone. By evening, the flight was marked overdue. By nightfall, presumed lost. The following day, the official entry was made in the unit's logbook: aircraft failed to return. Cause: probable weather. No further details were added. No coordinates, no mayday call, no trace. The entry was oddly short, almost too neat for an aircraft and crew that had simply disappeared. Back home, a telegram was delivered to Walker's wife. It carried the words she had dreaded since the day he left. Missing in action, presumed dead. A folded American flag would follow later, along with a letter of condolence from the War Department. The letter said little, only that her husband had been lost on a mission over the Alps. There was no mention of circumstances, no explanation beyond bad weather. For the family, that was the end of the story. No body, no wreckage, just silence and the weight of an empty chair at the table. The war moved on, and so did the records. But even then, a few details did not quite fit. Fellow airmen recalled that the weather had been clear that morning, thin clouds, light wind, nothing severe enough to bring down a bomber. The official search logs listed no storms in the area, and in the years that followed, veterans who had flown similar routes remarked on the oddness of the case. If it was weather, where was the wreckage? If it was enemy fire, why no distress call? The logbooks give no answers, only a single vague line. And for 80 years, that was all the world knew. A crew lost to the mountains, their story closed by a neat official phrase. But the Glacier that released the bomber in 2023 told a different story. The aircraft was not shattered by storms. Its fuselage carried marks no weather could leave. The official report said cloud and ice. The wreckage whispered something else. The question hangs, if the sky was clear, then what really forced that bomber from the air? In the summer of 2023, the ice gave way. A group of hikers was moving along a high ridge in the Alps when something unusual caught their eyes. At first it looked like an old piece of fencing, just a line of dull metal poking out of the snow. But when they came closer, they saw rivets, panels, and the faint curve of a wing. This was no fence. It was an aircraft. Word spread quickly. Local authorities sent a recovery team, joined by military historians and alpine rescuers. Within days, more of the glacier melted, and the full outline appeared. A bomber, half encased in ice, preserved like a frozen time capsule. The fuselage was scarred but still whole. Its tail section carried faded black numbers. When the team ran the numbers through wartime records, the result was immediate. The bomber matched the plane reported missing in 1943, the very one Walker and his crew had been flying. After 80 years, the Alps had given it back. The cold had done something remarkable. Instead of breaking the plane apart, the ice had sealed it. The cockpit glass was cracked but still in place. The markings on the nose were faint but readable. Even personal gear, helmets, oxygen masks, a jacket, lay where they had been left. It looked as though the crew might walk back in at any moment. But the most important find was under the pilot's seat. Wrapped in dark oilskin was a leather pouch, stiff but intact. Across the top, in fading ink, were two words, eyes only. Beneath that, DONOT open. The order had been ignored. The pouch had already been unsealed, perhaps long ago, perhaps more recently. Inside were three items. The first was a mission briefing sheet. Yellowed but still readable, it listed objectives, routes, and codes. At the top was a word no one on the team recognized, Nightingale. The second was a hand-drawn map. It showed mountains, valleys, and a flight path marked in pencil. But here was the problem. The route on the map was not the route recorded in the official wartime log. The bomber should have been flying north. The map bent south, toward a valley that was supposed to be empty. The third was a sheet of names, written in block letters, as if typed by military clerks. Several names were crossed out in red pencil. No explanation, just names, some marked, some left untouched. Together, the items told a story that did not match the one the War Department had written. What was Operation Nightingale? Why was the flight map different from the official record? And who were the people on that list? And why had someone decided to strike their names through? The pouch created more mysteries than it solved. Photographs were taken, scans made, and the documents secured. But even as the team worked, questions spread. Local newspapers reported the find, focusing on the miracle of a plane preserved by ice. Families of lost crew members received calls, some for the first time hearing that wreckage had been found. Yet quietly, among the recovery staff, unease grew. The weather that day in 1943 had been clear. There were no German fighter patrols in that sector, and the damage visible on the fuselage, clean punctures along the side, looked less like storm destruction and more like ground fire. But at the altitude the bomber was supposed to be flying, that shouldn't have been possible. The map suggested something else entirely, that the plane had been rerouted toward a place that did not appear on official charts, a place deep in the mountains, absent from Allied records, a place the crew had never been meant to survive. And tucked in the corner of the briefing sheet, just beneath the codename Nightingale, was a chilling phrase in neat type: asset expendable. 80 years after the crash, the Alps had not only given back a missing plane, they had given back a mystery the war had buried. If the official story was weather, then what had really brought this bomber down? Alex Carter knew he couldn't rely on official records. Every file he touched was blocked. Every query raised new warnings. If he wanted answers, he would have to look elsewhere. He started with a university archive in Geneva, where wartime diaries and local reports had been collected after the war. Among the dusty boxes and handwritten journals, one slim notebook caught his attention. It belonged to a resistance courier who had operated in the Alps during 1943. The entries were brief, coded in shorthand, but one line stood out. Met German patrol near the High Valley. Site heavily guarded. No signs, no name. Locals avoid the place. The courier had drawn a crude sketch of the mountains, marking a spot that looked eerily similar to the valley traced on the bomber's secret map. Alex photographed the page. Next, he spoke with villagers in the small towns below the glacier. At first, the older residents shrugged off his questions, but one man, well into his 90s, remembered stories from his youth. There was a place, the man said, his voice thin but steady. We were told never to go near it. Soldiers stood guard, but there were no flags, no signs. Just a fenced compound hidden in the trees. We called it the Silent Camp. What was inside? Alex asked. The old man shook his head. We never knew. Only that men went in, and very few came out. Alex felt a chill. Back at his desk, he laid the resistance sketch over the map from the pouch. The alignment was exact. The hand-drawn flight path curved toward the very valley both the courier and the villager had described, a place erased from Allied charts, yet remembered by those who had lived in its shadow. Then came the wreckage analysis. Photographs of the bomber's fuselage showed clear puncture holes along the side. The recovery team's report confirmed they came from bullets, not shrapnel. The angle suggested the fire came from below, at low altitude. That didn't fit the official story of bad weather. If the bomber had crashed in a storm, the damage would have been chaotic. Broken wings, sheared metal, scattered debris. Instead, the holes were neat, clustered, and deliberate. Evidence of ground fire. But why would a bomber on a routine reconnaissance run be flying low enough to take hits from the ground? The answer, Alex suspected, was on the list from the pouch. He began checking the names. Not through government systems, those were blocked, but through old books, obituaries, and scattered mentions in wartime journals. Slowly, a pattern emerged. One man had been a radio operator, trained in interception. Another was a photographic analyst, skilled at reading reconnaissance images. A third had been involved in code-breaking experiments before the war. These were not ordinary infantrymen. They were specialists, men with skills too valuable to be left in a nameless mountain camp. The list wasn't random. It was a roster of intelligence assets, and someone, somewhere, had marked several of those names in red. The pouch was beginning to tell a different story. The bomber wasn't lost to weather. It had been sent on a mission toward a secret site in the Alps, a site guarded in silence, whispered about by villagers, and noted in resistance diaries. Its crew carried orders not of reconnaissance, but of extraction. Extraction of men whose skills could change the course of the war. Alex closed his notebook, his heart heavy. If this was true, then the bomber hadn't been on a routine flight at all. It had been sent to pull men out of a hidden camp. Men who knew things the enemy wanted. Men too dangerous to leave behind. But that left a final, haunting question. Why were these specialists gathered in that secret alpine site in the first place? Alex returned to the documents from the pouch with fresh eyes. He read the mission brief from top to bottom, this time aloud and slowly, as if the words would change if he gave them weight. The page was short, almost cold in tone, and yet each line carried more meaning than a paragraph of official reports. The brief did not say reconnaissance. It did not mention weather, photo runs, or returning by noon. Instead, the first clear sentence named the purpose with no decoration at all. Primary objective: extract designated personnel from Alpine holding site. There it was, plain enough for anyone to understand. The bomber had been sent to extract people, not to photograph bridges. Those people were not a random group. They were the names on the list: radio, photo, code, skilled men, high value. Below that, a second sentence tightened the air in the room. Secondary objective: deny reprisals. If extraction fails, destroy site. Alex read it twice. Deny reprisals. Destroy the site. It was language that left no room for debate. If the crew could not pull the men out, they were to make sure no one left inside could be used against their own side. It was a terrible order, but it matched the fear of the time. Secrets could win a war. Secrets in the wrong hands could lose it. The next line stopped him cold. Crew status: asset expendable. It took Alex a long while to move his eyes away from that phrase. Expendable is a hard word when attached to real people. He imagined the pilot, Walker, tucking his wife's photograph into his jacket. He imagined the crew joking about a routine flight. Did they know? Did anyone tell them their own brief named them as expendable? Or had that word lived only on the copy in the pouch, typed by someone far from the mountains? Alex placed the sheet down and stared at the map again. The penciled curve drifted toward the unnamed valley, toward the place the villagers had called the silent camp. If the bomber flew low, following that track, the pattern of ground fire made sense. Searchlights, machine guns in a ring. A plane forced down or hit while trying to drop men or supplies. He turned to the back of the brief. There, in the margin, a faint notation had been made in a different hand. It looked like a name at first, or a bird. He tilted the page, shifted the light, and the letters grew sharper. Blackbird. The word sat alone, not in the typed lines, but added near a schedule of times. Next to the word, a tiny arrow pointed at a column labeled Windows. Alex matched the windows to the flight path. They were timed slots, narrow gaps when guards changed, when patrols thinned, when a plane might approach unseen. He checked the list of names again. Next to several of them, in the same faint hand, was a mark that looked like a check. By others, a small dash, and by three, a firm red line. Those three lined up with men who, according to the scattered mentions he had found, had last been seen in the high valleys during the exact period the brief described. He compared the brief with newspaper clippings and memoir footnotes he had collected from libraries. He found hints of other attempts, not at this site, but at similar ones in other parts of the occupied territories. Attempts described in vague lines as aborted under fire, unable to rendezvous, enemy alerted. That word kept appearing. Alerted. Not surprised, not caught by chance. Alerted. The pattern made Alex feel sick. These operations did not simply fail. They failed too cleanly. Patrols in the right place at the right hour. Floodlights on before a plane reached the fence. Ground fire waiting along the exact approach route. It was as if someone had whispered the plan into the enemy's ear. He called the old man from the village again. "Do you remember any talk of planes in the night?" Alex asked. The old man took his time. "Twice," he said. "We heard an engine low over the trees, then gunfire. The sound after that stays with you. Men shouting, then a fire on the far ridge. The next day, extra soldiers came in. They took tools and crates away from the compound." "Tools?" Alex asked. "Generators," the old man said. "Radios, boxes with wires. We did not know the words then. We only knew they were important. Radios, generators, boxes with wires." It fit the roles on the list: code, photo, radio. The site was not just a prison. It was a place where those skills could be turned against the Allies. Trained men forced to help, or at least forced to talk until others could use their knowledge. Alex dug back into the university archive. He asked for records tied not to the Allies, but to German logistics. A clerk produced a captured inventory from late 1943. One line caught his eye: transfer of interrogation equipment to Alpine Sector 4. Another: temporary holding for technical prisoners. Technical prisoners. The words slid into place beside the list of names. He laid out his notes on a table and drew lines that felt too easy to draw. The bomber's map to the valley, the courier's diary, the villager's memory of guards without signs, the captured inventory with technical prisoners, the photos of the fuselage with bullet holes from below, the mission brief with its blunt objectives, the cold phrase asset expendable, and that strangest, quietest addition, Blackbird by the timing column. He called a historian he trusted, someone who had worked on declassifications for decades. He avoided the government system and spoke over a clean line. "I need to ask about a word," Alex said. "Have you seen Blackbird in any World War II operations files?" The historian was silent for a long breath. "Not in the standard archives," she said. "Sometimes in personal papers, in marginal notes. It shows up near schedules, drop zones, or agent lists, but it never appears in the official headings." "So what is it?" he asked. "There are theories," she said. "Some say it was a liaison, a handler who timed operations. Others say it was a channel, an internal route for passing times and routes between units. But there's a darker theory." "What theory?" "That Blackbird wasn't a person or a channel," she said softly. "It was a hole, a leak, a place where information disappeared and then reappeared on the wrong side." Alex felt the room tilt. "You mean a traitor?" "I mean," the historian said, "that when Blackbird appears next to timing windows, the mission often fails, and not by luck, by precision." He ended the call and stared at the page again. Blackbird, a word that had no file of its own, a word that existed only in the margins, next to times, routes, names, and windows, a word that, when present, seemed to call down ground fire at the exact moment a plane approached a fence in the dark. He returned to the brief one last time. Below the line about denying reprisals, at the very bottom of the page, a final instruction had been typed in smaller letters. It was easy to miss. If extraction compromised, transmit list confirmation. Proceed to secondary. Transmit list confirmation. Confirm the names. Make sure headquarters knew who was inside the camp and who had been crossed out. Then, if the extraction could not succeed, do what the secondary objective demanded. Alex imagined the scene. A bomber flying low, trying to reach a valley with no name. A pilot looking at a map that bent where the official route did not. A crew ordered to extract men who knew things that could turn battles. And someone, somewhere, knowing the time, the route, the window, waiting. He spread his notes and saw that the midpoint of the story had arrived. The mission purpose was no longer a mystery. The plane had been sent to extract high-value intelligence prisoners. If that failed, the crew was to destroy the site to prevent reprisals. The crew itself had been labeled expendable. Other attempts in other places had failed with unnatural timing. And the same strange word sat near the schedule, Blackbird. The question now was not whether the bomber had been on a routine flight. It had not. The question was simple and brutal. Was there a traitor feeding times, routes, and targets to the enemy? Alex lifted the photograph of the tail code one more time and thought of Walker's wife's message on the back of a picture. "Come home safe." Then he looked at the word expendable and felt a hard clarity settle in. Someone had planned for this crew not to come home at all. There was one way to test the dark theory. He would need a witness who had lived through that valley, someone who had seen the silent camp from the inside, or stood at its fence when the engines passed low in the night. Alex closed the folder, took a breath, and made the call that would carry the story from paper to a living voice. The Nightingales were not just a code name anymore. They were people, and if a blackbird had circled over their fate, he was going to find it. Alex Carter didn't have to wait long before the pushback began. 2 days after he filed his first field report, he was summoned to a video call with officials from the Historical Records Office. Their tone was polite, almost gentle, but every sentence carried the weight of warning. "Mr. Carter," one of them said, "you may be overinterpreting what you found. These documents, if genuine, were likely part of a deception operation. You know how common such tactics were in 1943. Alex kept silent, listening as they gave him the tidy version. The unusual map? A decoy route, meant to confuse enemy intelligence if the papers were captured. The names list? Dummy entries, a mix of real and invented identities, designed to mislead anyone who found it. The phrase asset expendable? a catch-all term used in many deception plans, not a literal sentence of death. And the code name Nightingale? Almost certainly a cover signal, the official assured him, with no connection to an actual mission. It was neat. Too neat. Every irregularity had an explanation polished smooth by 80 years of hindsight. You see, the second official added, this crew likely flew a routine flight as recorded. The pouch in the wreck was part of an elaborate ruse, nothing more. Alex thanked them, closed the call, and sat in silence. The explanation fit on paper, but it didn't match what he'd seen in the wreckage or what he'd heard from villagers. A deception plan didn't explain bullet holes from ground fire. It didn't explain the courier's diary describing a silent camp, and it certainly didn't explain the warning text on his phone, "Stop digging." Later that week, Alex traveled back to the alpine town near the crash site. He had arranged to meet an elderly man who claimed to have worked with the local resistance in 1943. The man's name was Henry. His back was bent with age, but his voice carried a firmness that decades hadn't erased. "The officials say your bomber was lost to weather," Alex began, "or that its documents were fakes." Henry shook his head slowly. "That is what they want you to believe, but I was there. I saw the valley." He described how, as a young courier, he had delivered messages and supplies along mountain trails. One evening, he was ordered to skirt a zone guarded more heavily than any front-line post he'd seen. Soldiers patrolled without insignia. The fences had no signs. "We did not call it by name," Henry said. "We only called it La Vallée Muette, the Mute Valley." "What was inside?" Alex pressed. Henry's eyes clouded. "I never entered, but we knew what it held. Prisoners, not ordinary soldiers. Men the Germans wanted to break slowly. Men who carried secrets." He leaned closer. "One night, a plane came. Low, too low. We heard the engines echo off the cliffs. Then searchlights lit the sky, and machine guns answered. The next day, the Germans doubled their guard. That was no decoy. That was real." Alex felt the careful, reasonable explanations from the officials crumble. You couldn't tell a man like Henry that what he heard and saw was staged. His memory was too sharp, his details too specific. But Henry wasn't done. "Others tried to ask about it," he said quietly. "After the war, a professor from Geneva came here. He asked too many questions. He died in a fall from a mountain path. Another, a writer, wanted to publish a book about the camp. He drowned in a lake he had swum across many times before." Henry paused, lowering his voice. "Accidents," they said. "Always accidents." The pattern sent a chill through Alex. He had already sensed he was walking on dangerous ground. Henry's stories confirmed it. People who asked about the Mute Valley had a way of not finishing their work. Alex looked at his notes, the ones he carried in a plain black folder, the tidy explanations from officials on one side, the rough, urgent words of witnesses on the other. One side spoke of deception, harmless paperwork, tricks of war. The other spoke of silent camps, bullet holes, searchlights in the night. And then Henry gave him something more. "I kept a diary," the old man whispered. "Small notes, nothing grand. But I wrote down what I carried, where I went, what I saw, and once, what I heard. A German officer speaking to another. He used a word that made no sense to me then, but maybe it will to you now." Henry's hand trembled as he wrote on a slip of paper. The letters were uneven, but the word was clear. Nachtigall, the German for nightingale. Alex felt the pieces tighten like a noose. The code name wasn't an invention. It was spoken, whispered, recorded in a witness's diary 80 years earlier. Henry looked him in the eye. "The officials will tell you again that you are mistaken, that this was all deception. But I was there. I saw the camp. I heard the name. And I wrote it down in 1943. The notes are still with me." For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of wind against the shutters. Alex realized the story had shifted. The neat explanations were the cover. The survivor's words, fragile with age yet firm with memory, cut through them. And if Henry truly still had notes from 1943, then the next chapter wasn't in an archive or a government file. It was in the handwriting of a man who had risked his life in the Mute Valley and who had carried the truth across 8 decades. Alex Carter left Henry's house with copies of several pages from the old diary. The paper was thin and fragile, the ink browned with age, but the dates were clear. September 1943. Mentions of the Mute Valley, the sound of an engine in the night, searchlights, gunfire, and that word written twice in the margin, as if the writer wanted to make sure he would not forget it. Nachtigall, Nightingale. Alex scanned the pages and sent them to two journalists he trusted, one at a European paper that handled war archives, another at a small American outlet known for careful work. He did not push them to publish. He asked only for quiet verification. Check the handwriting with period samples. Check the ink. Check the diary's provenience inside the university inventory. Then the delays began. The European journalist texted first. "We need more time. Legal wants to see everything." The American reporter followed. "Our editor says sensitive. We can't move until we talk to government contacts." Hours later, the American's follow-up message was sharper. "Please stop sending new files. We were told to hold." "Told by whom?" Alex wrote back. No reply. At the mountain, access to the wreck changed overnight. The local recovery team, friendly and open the previous week, now stared down at their boots when Alex approached. The site manager, a woman who had given him time and space to look, met him at the boundary line and kept her voice low. "I'm sorry," she said. "We have new rules. No outside researchers without authorization from Brussels." "It came this morning." Alex asked to see the order. She shook her head. "Verbal only." "But the soldiers came with it." He followed her glance. A small group of uniformed men stood by the rope line that ringed the exposed fuselage. They smiled at nothing and kept their hands in their pockets. One of them watched Alex the way a hawk watches a field. Back in town, Alex learned that the parcel he had sent to the European journalist, the one with photo prints and a duplicate of the list from the pouch, had been held at customs. The tracking page said routine inspection. The courier's voice on the phone said seizure under authority. No one would give him a number to call. When he tried to book a last-minute flight to meet the American reporter in person, his reservation failed at payment. He tried a second airline. The screen flashed red. Unable to process. Contact support. Support placed him on hold until the call dropped. When he tried to log into the government archive system again, his session timed out before the search page loaded. He called the historian who had warned him about Blackbird. Her line went to voicemail, then to a generic message. When he switched phones and tried again, a stranger answered and said he had reached the wrong number. By evening, the shape of it was clear. The story was growing teeth in the present, not just in the past. The neat explanation from officials, deception op, dummy documents, had been replaced by quiet pressure, delays, holds, polite smiles that kept their hands invisible. Henry called from his small house with the shutters. "I heard you had trouble at the Glacier," he said. "You should not stay alone." "I'm fine," Alex said, looking at the door more often than before. "I have friends." "Make more," Henry replied. Then he added, "There is someone you should speak to, an old liaison from the war years. He was not our friend then, but he knew things we did not. He called himself a handler when he spoke to the British. He is still alive." "Where?" Alex asked. Henry gave him a number instead of a place. "Call at 9. He will answer if he wishes." At 9, Alex placed the call over his laptop. The screen lit with a waiting symbol, then resolved into the face of a very old man sitting in a bright, orderly room. White hair combed back, a thin cardigan over a shirt with a narrow collar, eyes clear in a way that did not belong to his age. "Mr. Carter," the man said, not asking but stating, "I'm told you are making trouble from a very old story." "Then you know the story," Alex replied. "I know many," the old man said. "But the ones that matter are the ones that end when they should. Yours has run too far for something as small as a crashed plane." "Small?" Alex said. "A bomber sent to extract prisoners is not small." "Who told you that?" The old man smiled. "Ah, the pouch. A clever piece of theater." "You're saying it's a deception op," Alex said, repeating the line he had already heard. "Of course," the old man said, as if to a child. "You can place anything in a cockpit. You can stamp anything on a leather pouch. In the war we wrote fictions that saved lives." "Then why the diary?" Alex asked. "Why does a courier write Nachtigall in 1943? The old man's smile thinned. "Because we seeded words, to be overheard, to be repeated, to mislead. And the bullet holes? Ground fire at low altitude. That doesn't look like theater." Planes crash, the old man said. Bullets fly in wars. If you interpret noise as signal, you will hear anything you wish. He had an answer for everything. It was polished as stone by long use. Alex felt his jaw tighten. Blackbird, he said, watching the man's face for a flinch. What is Blackbird? The old man's gaze shifted, a tiny movement. A signal channel, he said too quickly, as if reciting from a card. A timing reference used by liaison officers, nothing more. Then why does Blackbird appear only beside windows that end in ambush? Alex asked. Selection bias, the old man replied. You are looking for it now. You see it where it exists and ignore where it does not. He leaned in. Mr. Carter, close your file. Return to your desk. This is not a hill worth dying on. Alex almost ended the call. Then the old man added a phrase that did not belong to safe, retired speech. We can resolve this with your editor. He'll advise you to let it go tomorrow. Alex froze. He had not told the old man he was working with any editor. He had never used the word editor with anyone on the government side. He had not even named the paper out loud. How would you speak to my editor? Alex asked softly. The old man blinked. For a brief moment, his calm cracked. He adjusted his sleeve, buying time he could not admit to needing. The same way we used to speak to radio men, he said finally. Through channels. Channels that still exist, Alex said. Now today. The old man made a small gesture with his hand. History does not end, Mr. Carter. It grows foundations. Alex reached to the side and tapped his phone screen. The camera light turned red for a second, then off again, tucking the recording into a folder he did not keep on any cloud. Thank you, Alex said. You've been very helpful. I doubt that, the old man said, and the screen went black. Alex stared at his reflection. He felt the air in the room thin, as if the mountain had followed him home. The man's slip had not been large, but it was enough. He had admitted to access. He had admitted to influence. He had spoken of a conversation with an editor that should have been private. This was not a story only about 1943. It was a story about now. He tried the American reporter again. This time, she answered on a new number and spoke fast. I can't talk long, she said. Our legal team flagged your material. Then an old contact called with friendly advice to wait. I didn't tell anyone I was working with you. Be careful. Were you told the word Blackbird? Alex asked. A pause. How do you know that? Yes. They said it isn't what I think it is. They said I could get in trouble if I keep asking. Record everything, Alex said. Every call, every email. Don't save it on your work systems. I already am, she said, and ended the call. Alex looked at his notebook. The page for Chapter 6, his own private labels, was full. Officials with neat explanations. A survivor with hard details. A pattern of accidents around anyone who wrote too close to the Mute Valley. And now, an old handler with a polished story and a crack that showed the present tense. He made a new heading. Now or never. The window for getting the evidence out was narrowing. The wreck site was locked down. The parcels stopped. The journalists warned. The flights blocked. Even his attempts to trace the word Blackbird through open sources led to dead ends that felt placed, not random. He called Henry one last time that night. You said the notes are still with you, Alex said. Are there more? There are, Henry said. The ones I kept back. They are yours if you come in the morning. I will. And Alex, the old man added, bring a friend. 2 if you have them. Why? Because when a story grows teeth, Henry said, it also grows an appetite. Alex set his alarm and placed his phone in a metal tin. He shut down his laptop and slid the recorded call into a pocket drive he had not used before today. He packed the diary scans, the list of names, the map, and the photograph of the bullet holes. He wrote, on one slip of paper only he would see, publish Plan B. Then he hid that slip where even a careful search would pass over it. The question now was simple and sharp. Could he get the evidence out before the window closed? He turned off the light and watched the room in the dark. Somewhere, someone else was watching too. Morning would decide which of them moved faster. Alex woke before dawn with the weight of the decision on him. The previous night had shown him how fast channels could close. Journalists warned off, parcels seized, flights blocked. If the story was to break, it could not depend on one person, one server, or one newsroom. It needed a plan built to survive pressure. He started by calling people who did not work for governments. First, a cybersecurity friend named Mara who ran a small firm that helped whistleblowers and investigative reporters protect sources. Second, an editor in Australia who had said she could run a story quickly and without being stopped by local offices. Third, a lawyer in Geneva who specialized in international media and safe harbor laws. They agreed to a simple rule: no single point of failure. The materials, the diary scans, the mission brief, the hand-drawn map, the list of names, and the bank-like records Alex had begun to uncover would be copied and sent to several places at once. Each copy would be protected differently. Mara set up 3 paths. One copy would go to a hardened server in New Zealand with strict legal protections for publishers. Another would be placed in escrow with the Geneva lawyer, locked until a synchronized release time. A third would be mirrored on an independent archive run by a non-profit watchdog in South Africa. Each location was chosen because the laws there made immediate seizure difficult and time-consuming for any single foreign power. Next came verification. Journalists can't publish accusations without proof, and proof needs checks. Alex collected the chain, the pouch scans, metadata from the recovery team's photos, the courier diary with library stamps, handwriting samples from Henry, and arithmetic on dates and coordinates that lined up in 3 independent ways. Mara brought in 2 independent forensic analysts to confirm the document's age and the ink's composition. The lawyer arranged for notarized timestamps for each file, making it clear that these items existed unchanged at a recorded moment. They also needed experts who could speak to the financial side. The trail Alex had begun to follow slipped into notes, hidden in redactions, led toward a set of anonymous transfers and shell entities. They were small at first, obscure companies in neutral countries with bank accounts in places known for secrecy. Over years, those tiny sums recirculated and then multiplied. Where the money appeared to stop grouped around certain accounts, a name in an old ledger appeared repeatedly in the personnel columns. The ledger used a code, BB, next to several transfers. The historian had suggested Blackbird. The pattern was starting to hold. Alex and the editors agreed on a 2-step verification message for publication. Step 1. Publish the basic narrative with photocopies of the pouch and Henry's diary and proof of provenance. Step 2. If attempts to block or discredit those basic documents came, the outlets would immediately publish the financial and personnel trails, bank records, shell company filings, and a timeline tying transfers to personnel movements. That second step would be the hard proof no smear could easily erase. Mara explained the release mechanics in plain language. At a synchronized time, the escrow would open and release encrypted keys. Those keys would unlock the primary server in New Zealand, which would push mirrored copies to partner outlets across jurisdictions. Each outlet would run the same initial package at the same moment. If one newsroom was blocked or detained, the other outlets would still push the story. If the servers were hit, the mirrors and the escrow copies would still exist. If journalists were arrested, public mirrors and torrent copies would be available within hours. They tested everything with dummy files to be sure the chain held. It did. The lawyer confirmed the notarized timestamps. The forensic analysts signed short affidavits about the document's likely age and provenance. The Australian editor prepared her headline. The South African watchdog agreed to publish a mirror and to house the raw files for independent researchers. Alex also prepared a short statement to send to families before publication. He wanted the families to hear the first public words from reliable journalists, not from anonymous leaks. He coordinated a private line to the families of the crew with the lawyer and the Australian editor. Each family would receive the same verified packet at release time. That was a promise he made and planned to keep. There was one last, delicate task: the timing. They chose a window that maximized coverage and minimized the ability to act fast enough to stop them. Early morning in Europe, evening in the Southern Hemisphere. That schedule would give the outlets in the South a full working day to publish and mirror before the North woke. They set a release time and encoded it into files and legal notes so nothing could change it at the last minute without everyone seeing. Alex sat with the packet of files, each copy marked, each expert note attached. He felt relief for the first time that day. They had done everything practical. They had layered defenses. They had witnesses, forensics, notarized timestamps, multiple outlets, and legal guardians for the materials. But he also knew danger today wore a new face. If Blackbird was a leak, and if the handler who had smiled and said, "We can resolve this with your editor," had the reach he suggested, then the pressure would come not only through legal channels but through relationships. Editors could be persuaded. Couriers could be stopped. Servers could be attacked. And if they could find a way to stop one outlet, they could raise the cost high enough to make the others hesitate. That night before the release, Alex walked the town again to clear his head. Villagers nodded but offered no words. Henry gave him an extra photocopy and a straight look. "If they come," Henry said, "do not hand them paper. Hand them voice. Tell them what you heard. Do not let the paper die." Alex understood. Even perfect technical preparation could be undone by small human choices, fear, loyalty, or bribery. He thought of the handler's slip on the video call. That crack had revealed access. Now it felt as if a long hand reached across decades to pinch shut the window they had created. When Alex returned to his room, his phone buzzed. A final message from the Australian editor. "Green light. We publish at 6 o'clock GMT. Keys will release at 5:58. Be ready." He closed his eyes and ran through the checklist in his head. Files copied, notarized, verified, escrow set, mirrors in place, family packets prepared, legal team on standby. He placed his hand on the packet and felt the flutter of his pulse. They had done everything they could. Now it was a race against time and influence. At 5:56, Mara sent a short message. 2 minutes. Alex breathed in. He thought of the pilot's photograph tucked in a jacket 80 years ago and of the pouch wrapped in oilskin. He thought of Henry's notebook and the single word written in the margin. He thought about the list of names and the red pencil that had marked some of them. Then he turned his phone on and watched the clock. Would the story publish, or would the plug be pulled before they could push the button? The answer would come in 2 minutes. At exactly 6 o'clock GMT, the keys released. A sequence of digits, meaningless alone, unlocked mirrors across 3 continents. Within 60 seconds, headlines appeared in Sydney, Johannesburg, Wellington, and Cape Town. WWII bomber pilot's last mission reveals hidden Operation Nightingale. Secret files uncovered in Glacier point to betrayal and cover-up. Families receive proof after 80 years. Not weather, but orders. Screens lit across the world. Social feeds spread the images first. The leather pouch, the watermarked mission brief stamped eyes only. The hand-drawn map bent toward a valley that did not exist. The diary with the word Nachtigal underlined. The typed line that marked the pilot as an expendable asset. Within hours, the names circulated. Both the crew who vanished and the list of specialists crossed out in red. Historians recognized some of them as intelligence officers reported missing in official Allied rosters. Families who had lived with silence saw their relatives' names appear on screen. By noon in Europe, pressure was already building. Lawmakers called for hearings. Editorials demanded that classified archives be unsealed. One headline in London read, "If we lied about this, what else?" Alex sat in Henry's kitchen as the television replayed the same images again and again. Henry kept nodding. "The paper speaks now," he said. "No one can pretend not to see it." The American outlets hesitated at first, but by the afternoon, the story was too large to ignore. The New York Times and Washington Post both ran summaries based on international reporting, noting that U.S. authorities had no comment. Cable networks filled airtime with side-by-side maps, the official route, the real route, and the coordinates of the glacier where the bomber had slept for 80 years. At Arlington, families of airmen gathered. For the first time, they were told not just that their sons and husbands had died, but why. Official letters arrived by courier. Inside were copies of the recovery team's forensic confirmations, serial numbers from dog tags, fragments of uniforms, a silver charm engraved with initials. For one widow's grandson, it was the first tangible evidence of a relative spoken about only in photographs. The military, under pressure, announced it would repatriate the remains of the crew. Full honors, delayed by 8 decades, would be given. The folded flags would no longer sit alone on mantles. They would carry names, not just silence. But alongside comfort came anger. Families who had lived with the story of bad weather, routine patrol, now knew it had been false, that their kin were used in a mission designed to fail, or worse, betrayed. News anchors read their statements. "We were lied to. He wasn't expendable. We want the truth, not another cover." In capitals across Europe, officials scrambled. Some claimed ignorance, blaming wartime chaos. Others insisted it was all a deception op, meant to mislead the Germans. But those excuses frayed when reporters asked, why then were documents marked still classified in 2023? Why had families been denied access for generations? One afternoon session in the British Parliament turned explosive. A junior minister admitted that Nightingale files had been reviewed at the highest level within the past 10 years. That line alone lit fires. Why were Cold War-era officials combing WWII prisoner extraction records? In Washington, two senior archivists resigned within hours. A Defense Department spokesperson promised a full historical review. Investigative committees were announced, staffed by lawmakers who smelled both scandal and opportunity. The pressure forced open small doors. National archives in Belgium and France released microfilm reels showing unacknowledged prisoner camps. German wartime logs, long ignored, were dusted off and posted online. Historians dug eagerly, cross-referencing dates and places. The gaps in the official story yawned wider. At every turn, the shadow of one word appeared: Blackbird. Not in headlines yet, but in footnotes, in screenshots of marginalia, in hushed commentary on late-night programs. Reporters hinted at a channel of betrayal, an internal leak that compromised multiple missions. Experts on the air shook their heads. If true, this changes not just one story, but the whole record of Allied intelligence. For Alex, the day blurred. He watched officials deny, resign, or promise cooperation. He took calls from families who thanked him, then demanded answers he did not yet have. He heard Henry repeat softly, "The truth is heavy, but it does not break." That night, the world was different. What had been hidden in ice for 80 years was now public record. What had been whispered in diaries and faded maps was debated in parliaments and printed on front pages. Yet even amid the light, one question burned darker. The old handler's voice echoed in Alex's memory. "We can resolve this with your editor." That slip proved influence alive in the present. The publication had cracked the wall, but had it reached the foundation? Or had they only peeled away one layer while the true architect, the real Blackbird, remained buried deeper still? The next step would show whether the light could reach that far, or whether the shadows had another move left. The ceremony was simple, and that was what made it powerful. On a clear autumn morning, the crew of the long-lost bomber were finally laid to rest. White headstones, rows of uniforms, and a folded flag handed to a grandson who had grown old waiting for an answer. For the first time, the words spoken at the graveside matched the reality. These men were not lost to weather. They were not routine casualties. They were sent on a mission that history chose to forget, and today we remember it for what it was. The families stood in silence, some weeping, some simply holding the documents that had been delivered to them at last. A mission brief stamped eyes only. A map bent toward a valley that was never supposed to exist. A list of names, some crossed in red. For decades, they had been told a story neat enough to fit on a condolence letter. Now they knew the truth. Messy, painful, but theirs. Across Europe and America, governments scrambled to show lessons had been learned. Small, practical reforms were announced. A rule that no family could be denied access to historical files about missing relatives. A review board to strip away outdated secrecy stamps. New oversight to ensure no expendable asset orders could ever be written again. No one pretended these steps erased the past, but they were a start. For Alex Carter, who had followed the trail from a glacier to dusty archives to an old man's slip on a video call, the end felt quieter. He stood apart at the funeral, not in uniform, not behind a lectern, but by the grave itself. He thought of the photograph that had sat in the cockpit for 80 years. He thought of the oilskin pouch, the shaky handwriting in the courier's diary, the word Nachtigall underlined twice. He thought of the polished denials, the threats, and the moment when the story finally broke free into daylight. And he thought about the difference between legend and truth. Legends are neat. They end clean, with folded flags and a simple line about bad weather. Truth is jagged. It leaves questions behind, stains on the paper, names crossed in red. But truth gives families closure. Legends only keep them waiting. At the grave, Alex let himself whisper one line. For the pilot whose last mission had been buried in ice and silence. You weren't expendable, not anymore. He placed a small notebook on the headstone, the one he had carried since the start. Inside were the outlines of the investigation, the notes of every witness, the copy of the old handler's slip, a record that would stay, even if others tried to erase it again. As the bugle faded and the crowd drifted away, Alex remained. Henry touched his shoulder once and left him to the quiet. The rows of headstones stretched on in every direction, each carrying its own story, each representing a silence that might one day demand a voice. He thought he was done, but when he returned to his desk, a new folder waited in the archive inbox. No sender listed, no subject line, just a name, Operation Sparrowfall. Inside were fragments, half a mission order, dates that didn't line up, a margin note signed with the same initials that had once marked Blackbird. The story of the bomber pilot was finished, but the fingerprints of the same hand were already on the next file, and Alex knew some wars never really end. They only wait for someone willing to open the folder. The investigation that began with a crack in the ice ended with a grave covered in flowers. For decades, silence had been the only answer families received. Silence in letters, silence in archives, silence in stone. But silence broke when the Glacier opened its hand and returned the truth. The pilot who vanished in 1943 was no longer just a folded flag in a drawer. His name, and the names of those who flew with him, were spoken again in full voice. They were honored not for a legend, not for a fiction, but for what they really faced. A mission built on secrets, betrayal, and sacrifice. Governments promised change. Files once locked away are now open. Oversight boards are being formed. Families who had lived with doubt finally have certainty. For them, the truth, however painful, was a kind of peace. And for Alex Carter, the lesson was clear. History is not tidy. It does not fit neatly into the lines of condolence letters or the careful words of official statements. History is human. It bends, it hides, it carries scars, and it waits patiently for someone willing to dig until the silence gives way. The truth that emerged from the Alps was not the story anyone expected. It was darker, heavier, more complicated. But it was real. And in the end, real stories are the ones worth carrying forward. As the last echoes of the bugle faded at the funeral, one thing was certain. The pilot's mission was finally complete. His story was no longer hidden in ice, but remembered in full light.